Turn around and place your hands behind your back, Officer Mallory ordered, his voice loud enough for the entire terminal to hear. Dr. Ayanna Brooks stood motionless, disbelief flickering in her eyes as cameras clicked and phones began recording. She wasn't just being handcuffed, she was being publicly humiliated, all because a man with a badge decided she didn't belong in first class. The polished tiles of Concorde International Airport gleamed under the morning sun, casting reflections from the high vaulted glass ceiling that made the entire terminal feel like a monument to modern travel. Passengers hurried past, some juggling rolling suitcases, others sipping overpriced coffee, but Dr. Ayanna Brooks walked with the unhurried poise of someone who knew exactly who she was. At 38, she had built a name for herself as one of the nation's leading voices in public health, a Harvard-trained attorney who had turned down a lucrative law career to lead the Unity Global Wellness Initiative. She wasn't just heading overseas, she was heading into communities in rural Ethiopia to expand mobile vaccine access and deliver desperately needed medications. Her carry-on was packed with life-saving supplies, permits, and official endorsements. The first-class ticket tucked in her passport wallet wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity for a 19-hour journey she had made many times before. But this morning, what Ayanna couldn't have known was that the greatest obstacle to her mission wasn't in a remote village, it was waiting for her at a security checkpoint just ahead. TSA officer Derek Mallory had been working this airport for over 15 years, and he carried himself with the bloated confidence of someone who believed the uniform gave him more than authority. It gave him control. He spotted Ayanna as she approached the priority access lane. Her navy blue pantsuit, the sleek braided updo, and the confident stride all radiated professionalism, but to Mallory, all he saw was a black woman walking like she owned the place. As Ayanna approached, she offered a polite nod and held out her boarding pass and passport. "Morning," she said calmly. Mallory barely glanced at the documents. "Regular screenings to the left," he said, already motioning her away. "I have priority access," Ayanna replied, her voice measured, not defensive. "First class, Summit Air Flight 781. "I said regular screening," he repeated, louder this time. Ayanna didn't move. "You've allowed every passenger in front of me through this lane," she said. "Why am I being sent elsewhere?" Mallory's jaw tightened. "Step aside. You're delaying others." Other travelers began to glance over. Some slowed their steps, a few pulled out their phones. Ayanna remained calm. "Officer Mallory, I'm not refusing a search. I'm simply asking to be treated the same as other passengers." "You people always have something to say," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. There it was. She heard it clearly, the venom masked as policy. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her voice low. "You people?" Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Don't raise your voice at me. That's aggressive behavior. Step over here for additional screening." Ayanna stared at him for a second, stunned not by the words themselves but by how casually they were delivered, as if this was normal. As if this was routine. He led her to a secondary inspection zone in full view of other passengers, snapping on blue gloves with deliberate flair. "Open your bag," he ordered. Ayanna complied. Her belongings were carefully packed, pre-counted boxes of amoxicillin, temperature-sensitive vaccines, sterilized bandages. He began pulling them out one by one, holding up bottles and squinting at labels like they were contraband. "That's a lot of meds," he remarked. "You planning to sell these?" "They're donations," she answered calmly. "I'm the director of a public health foundation. All the paperwork is right here." She held out a folder. Mallory didn't even look. "We'll see about that." He rummaged deeper, now opening her personal toiletry kit. "Expensive taste," he said with a sneer. "First-class ticket, designer bags, foundation director. Must be nice." His tone dripped with disbelief. "Flying first class to hand out Band-Aids?" "My travel class has nothing to do with TSA procedure," Ayanna replied. "If you have a legitimate security concern, I'm happy to answer it. But you're making comments about my profession and appearance, not the contents of my bag." His smile turned sharp. "You sound defensive." Got something to hide? No, she said simply. I sound like someone who's aware of her rights. That was the moment he decided to escalate. Turn around, he ordered. What? Place your hands behind your back. Are you arresting me? She asked, stunned. You're exhibiting disruptive behavior, questioning protocol. It's a federal offense to interfere with airport security. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't refused inspection. I haven't moved from where you directed me. That's enough, he barked, reaching for the cuffs. She didn't resist. Around them, phones were raised. Passengers murmured in disbelief. Some gasped. A few looked away, too uncomfortable to witness what felt like something they couldn't change. As the cold metal wrapped around her wrists, Ayanna felt a sharp bite of humiliation, not for herself, but for what this moment represented. It wasn't about her at all. It was about the system. She'd been reduced to a security threat not because she was dangerous, but because she dared to stand still and ask for fairness. Mallory clicked the cuffs tighter than necessary. See where your attitude got you, he muttered. Ayanna turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching. You're making a mistake, she said. One you'll regret very soon. Yeah, he chuckled. Call your lawyer. Or your boss. Or whoever you think you are. Actually, she said with quiet certainty, I'll call my husband. Her voice remained steady as she reached into her purse, with permission, of course, and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she had memorized not just with familiarity but with trust. When the line picked up, she said just 3 sentences, Quentin, it's Ayanna. I need you at Terminal D, TSA checkpoint. Officer Mallory has handcuffed me without cause. Bring legal. She ended the call. No drama. No tears. Just precision. Just power. Mallory rolled his eyes. Who's Quentin supposed to be, the mayor? Something like that, Ayanna replied, eyes forward. In the distance, TSA staff were already starting to shift. Supervisors took phone calls, glanced her way, began whispering into radios. Something was happening. A ripple she had set in motion with one phone call. And Officer Mallory had no idea that the man on the other end of that call wasn't just a concerned husband. He was Quentin Brooks, founder and CEO of Summit Air, the very airline whose logo was stamped all over the terminal they were standing in. The airline that brought in nearly half the airport's total traffic. The man who had risen from ramp agent to aviation titan. The man who had built a billion-dollar company and quietly bankrolled global health missions led by the very woman Mallory had just placed in cuffs. Mallory didn't know it yet, but his entire career had just changed trajectory. And not because Ayanna had screamed or resisted, but because she hadn't. Because she stood in stillness. Because she made a single, deliberate call. Because she was exactly the kind of black woman he'd assumed would stay silent. And now, the countdown to consequences had begun. Terminal D had never felt so quiet. Or so tense. Phones were still raised. Travelers watched from benches, security lines, coffee stands. Some had seen everything. Others had caught only the moment Officer Mallory pulled out the handcuffs. But by now, nearly everyone in the surrounding gates had heard whispers. Did you see what they did to that woman? She said she was flying first class. She's a doctor or something, and married to someone big. What they didn't yet know was that a reckoning was already making its way toward them. One that wore tailored navy and walked with a purpose no badge could stop. On the second floor of the terminal's administrative wing, calls had begun flooding in, first to TSA supervisors, then to the airport's central command. The name Quentin Brooks hit like a thunderclap. The founder and CEO of Summit Air. A man known as much for his empire as for his refusal to tolerate injustice. And his wife, Dr. Ayanna Brooks, was currently standing handcuffed in his terminal, surrounded by murmurs, cameras, and a very visible storm gathering. Officer Derek Mallory paced at the edge of the secondary screening area, arms folded as if bracing for backup. His arrogance hadn't yet given way to realization. To him, Ayanna was still just a defiant passenger. A mouthy woman in an expensive suit who refused to be told what to do. He hadn't made the connection yet. He hadn't noticed the shift in energy among staff, the way agents glanced at him with something closer to alarm than solidarity. He hadn't noticed the two Summit Air senior managers now whispering in rapid tones at the check-in counter, their eyes wide as they scanned their phones. He didn't notice that one of them had just texted the airline's legal counsel, "It's true. It's her. Terminal D, Gate 9. It's happening right now." 28 minutes after Ayanna made the call, the escalator near Gate 6 lit up with a pulse of movement. 3 sharply dressed professionals stepped off together, a woman in a gray pantsuit holding a leather folio, a man in a charcoal blazer, and walking at their center with calm intensity, Quentin Brooks. At 43, he didn't wear power loudly. But you could feel it. The airport director met them halfway, already sweating despite the AC. "Mr. Brooks, where is she?" Quentin asked, not stopping. "Sir, there's protocol. You've had 29 minutes to handle this," Quentin said without raising his voice. "And from what I've seen on these phones," he gestured toward the crowd, "protocol has already been trampled." The director scrambled to keep up as Quentin and his team made their way toward the crowd near security. Travelers stepped back. Employees turned to stare. And then they saw her, Ayanna, still handcuffed, still calm, standing at the center of the storm she hadn't caused but now controlled. Officer Mallory spotted the commotion and frowned. "Sir, this area is for personnel only. You can remove the cuffs," Quentin said, not even glancing at him. Mallory blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said," Quentin turned his gaze toward him, steady and lethal, "remove the handcuffs from my wife. Now." Mallory's hand hovered over his belt. "She's being detained for questioning." "No," came a second voice, this time from TSA Lieutenant Claire Durham, who had just arrived with her own escort. "She's not." "Officer Mallory, stand down." Mallory looked around, suddenly noticing what he'd failed to see before. The cluster of executives. The uniforms. The presence of his commanding officer. And the unmistakable realization creeping into his gut that something had gone horribly, catastrophically wrong. Ayanna's cuffs clicked open. She didn't flinch. She didn't rub her wrists. She simply stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Mallory. "You assumed I didn't belong here," she said, quiet but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You decided that my appearance meant my ticket was suspicious. That my calm response was defiance. That my refusal to be disrespected was aggression." Mallory opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Quentin placed a hand on Ayanna's back gently, then turned to the cluster of TSA supervisors and airport staff. "We're not here for apologies," he said. "We're here for change." "Sir," the airport director began, "we are deeply sorry for this situation, and I assure you it does not reflect our values." "It reflects exactly your values," Ayanna interrupted, her voice steady. "It reflects the systems you've allowed to exist unchecked. Systems where a woman of color is assumed to be a threat because she's in the wrong seat. Or the wrong line. Or wearing the wrong shoes. We're launching a full investigation," one TSA supervisor added. "Internal Affairs will handle this." "No," Quentin said. "Not internal. We want external accountability. Third-party review. Body cameras on all screening officers. Mandatory anti-bias training conducted by professionals who don't wear the same uniform. A new complaint protocol, transparent, public, and protected from retaliation. And supervisors who dismiss obvious discrimination," Ayanna added, glancing toward the senior staff who had earlier ignored her concerns, "should be held accountable." The tension in the room now belonged to the staff, not the travelers. Quentin's legal counsel opened her folio, handed the director a typed statement. "These are our demands. As the CEO of Summit Air, I expect a formal response in writing by 5 p.m. tomorrow." "And if we need more time?" the director asked. "Then Summit Air," Quentin replied coldly, "will begin evaluating alternate hubs. We contribute 45% of this terminal's daily traffic. We can shift that. And we will. The airport director swallowed hard. Understood. Ayanna stepped forward again. Her voice wasn't angry, it was bigger than that. This isn't about me. I have resources. I have influence. But most people don't. Most people can't make that call or summon an army of lawyers. Most people just miss their flight. Or lose their job. Or go home humiliated. If we allow this to go unchallenged, it will happen again. And next time, it might not be caught on camera. A silence fell across the terminal, heavier than metal detectors and louder than jet engines. It was the silence of truth spoken plainly. Mallory, still standing awkwardly at the edge of the security zone, looked at his supervisor. I thought she was just causing trouble. I didn't know who she, and that, Quentin said, turning to him at last, is exactly the problem. At that, Ayanna reached for Quentin's hand. I want to get back to the work that matters, she said. We've already lost an hour. The shipment needs to make the connection. Already being rerouted, Quentin's COO replied. And your new boarding pass is being delivered now. As they turned to leave, a voice cut through the stillness, young, hesitant but clear. Dr. Brooks? It was Amelia Gwynn, the ticketing agent who had been watching from behind the desk. She stepped forward, Summit ID badge in hand. I just wanted to say. I saw what happened. And I'm really sorry. It was wrong. Ayanna smiled warmly. Thank you for saying that. Amelia continued, if there's ever anything I can do to help fix this, I'd like to be part of that. Quentin nodded. We'll remember that. Amelia's eyes widened slightly, a small moment of recognition, being seen. Being valued. Ayanna offered a final glance toward Mallory, not filled with hatred, not even anger. Just clarity. Maybe now, she said softly, you'll learn the difference between authority and justice. And with that, she walked away, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. The woman he had handcuffed without cause had just written the first chapter of a change he never saw coming. And she had done it without yelling, without pleading. Just by knowing exactly who she was, and refusing to be treated as anything less. The memory of that morning, of the cuffs, the stares, the sting of quiet injustice, never truly left her. But 6 months later, as Dr. Ayanna Brooks stepped into Concord International Airport once again, she didn't carry bitterness. She carried change. The terminal looked the same on the surface, the same polished floors, the same steady hum of departure announcements, the same caffeinated energy of travelers headed in every direction. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the glossy exterior. It started at the security checkpoint. The moment Ayanna approached, she noticed the new signage posted in bold, accessible language above the entrance, every traveler. Every class. Equal respect. Beneath it, a row of complaint kiosks equipped with touchscreens and QR codes offered travelers immediate access to report misconduct. No more hidden bureaucracy, no more lost forms. Every officer in sight wore a body camera. Every screening lane had a visible supervisor. And every passenger was greeted with the same neutral tone of professionalism, regardless of their attire, accent, or the color of their skin. She handed her boarding pass and passport to the officer on duty. He scanned them, nodded politely, and directed her to the expedited lane without hesitation. No questions. No sideways looks. No undermining comments. Just a simple, quiet efficiency that spoke volumes. Ayanna moved through security with ease, her carry-on still filled with carefully packed medications bound for remote communities in Chad. Another mission. Another group of children waiting for vaccines, wound care, clean water tablets. But this time, she wasn't leaving behind the broken pieces of a humiliating experience, she was walking through the results of the reforms she and Quentin had sparked. The change hadn't come easily. The weeks following the incident had been filled with meetings, press inquiries, legal negotiations, and internal resistance from airport unions and local officials. But with the weight of Summit Air behind them, and the undeniable evidence captured by dozens of passenger phones, there was no burying what had happened. The footage had gone viral. Not just because of the injustice, but because of the calm with which Ayanna had endured it. The dignity in her restraint. The power in her silence. And when Quentin stood beside her at that press conference and pledged $10 million in funding toward national anti-bias training programs and traveler rights advocacy, it had been more than a promise. It was a declaration of intent. Inside the terminal now, Ayanna walked past the Summit Air customer service counter where a familiar young face brightened at the sight of her. "Dr. Brooks," said Amelia Nguyen, her voice full of warmth and pride. She stepped out from behind the desk, now wearing a navy blazer with a silver badge pinned over her heart, "Supervisor, Passenger Experience Team. I was hoping I'd see you today." "Amelia," Ayanna smiled. "You're official now." "Thanks to you," Amelia replied, a little shyly. "And Summit's tuition assistance program. I start my MBA next month." "Congratulations," Ayanna said sincerely. "You earned every step of it." Amelia leaned in slightly. "The day it happened, I almost didn't say anything. I was scared. But seeing you stand your ground, that changed me." Ayanna nodded gently. "It changed all of us." As she approached her gate, her eyes caught another familiar figure across the terminal. Dressed now in a navy button-up and khaki slacks, no badge, no cuffs, just a clipboard in hand, Derek Mallory. He stood beside a small group of new hires in security uniforms, speaking softly and gesturing toward the checkpoint. Ayanna paused for just a moment, observing from a distance. He moved differently now. Slower. Measured. Not with the swagger of before, but with the weight of awareness. She hadn't seen him since the investigation concluded. After internal review, he had been suspended for 90 days, required to complete 150 hours of community service with the Unity Global Wellness Initiative, and undergo full retraining under new FAA oversight. But the most significant shift hadn't come from punishment. It had come from proximity. Working alongside Ayanna's foundation, sorting medical supplies, helping at health fairs, watching the lives touched by the very work he had once ridiculed, had chipped away at the shell he'd built over decades in uniform. When he turned and spotted her, their eyes met. For a second, the terminal seemed to fade. Mallory walked over slowly. "Dr. Brooks," he said quietly. "Good morning," she replied, calm and open. "I didn't expect to see you here." "They moved me to community engagement," he explained, his gaze steady but not defensive. "Part of the reform package. I help train new officers now." "That's important work," Ayanna said. "I try to do it right," he nodded. "Because 6 months ago, I got it terribly wrong. I know you didn't owe me anything. But I want to say thank you. For how you handled it. For not destroying me when you could have." Ayanna regarded him for a moment, then nodded. "Growth only matters if it leads to change. Keep doing the work." "I will," he promised. "I am." Their conversation ended there. No dramatic reconciliation. No forced redemption. Just two people acknowledging a shared history and the future it had forced into motion. Ayanna boarded her flight a few minutes later. Her first-class seat was ready, her luggage already loaded, her boarding pass scanned without question. As she settled in, the flight attendant offered her a warm towel and a gentle "Welcome back, Dr. Brooks." She turned toward the window, watching the terminal grow smaller as the aircraft pushed back. In the distance, across the broad glass facade of Concord International, she could see it. The new slogan, simple, bold, and unmissable, etched across the upper atrium for every traveler to read, every traveler. Every class. Equal respect. It wasn't just branding. It was a promise. And it had taken a painful, public lesson to make that promise real. The plane lifted into the sky, heading toward yet another mission field, but Ayanna knew this flight, this moment, carried more than medicine. It carried the proof that one act of courage, one refusal to stay silent, could ripple outward. It could change policies, change perceptions, change people. Not just in one terminal, not just for one woman, but for everyone. Because real justice doesn't just correct the past, it reshapes the future. As the author of The Accusation at Terminal D, I wrote this story not just to entertain, but to shed light on the quiet, and sometimes not so quiet, forms of discrimination that still exist in places we assume are neutral. Dr. Ayanna Brooks' experience is fictional, but the reality behind it is all too familiar. Far too often, Black women, and people of color in general, are treated as if they don't belong in spaces they've earned the right to be in, whether it's a first-class seat, a boardroom, or a leadership role. They're questioned, doubted, and often dismissed. But what this story reminds us is that dignity, truth, and calm courage can be powerful tools in the face of injustice. One of the core lessons here is that power doesn't always come from shouting or fighting. It can come from standing still, knowing your worth, and refusing to let someone else's ignorance dictate your value. Ayanna didn't yell, she didn't resist, and she didn't back down. She simply stood in her truth and let the system reveal itself. And when the system failed her, she used that failure to bring about real, lasting change, not just for herself, but for others. To those who've experienced similar moments, where your identity was questioned, your intentions misunderstood, or your presence dismissed, know this: you have a voice, and it matters. You have the right to be seen, heard, and respected, regardless of where you come from, what you look like, or what uniform someone else is wearing. And to those who witness these moments, like Amelia in the story, remember that your silence speaks too. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up. Real change requires all of us, the person being mistreated, the one doing the mistreating, and the bystanders who choose whether to intervene or look away. To the loyal listeners and supporters of Us, Justice Stories, thank you for showing up. Thank you for believing that stories like these matter. Whether you're watching from your living room, during your morning coffee, or on your commute, your attention means more than you know. We're here to tell the stories that don't always make headlines but make a difference. And we do it for one reason, because justice doesn't start in courtrooms, it starts in moments, in airports, in classrooms, in office lobbies. It starts when one person says, "This isn't right," and another person listens. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And as always, tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice like this? Your voice helps shape the next story we tell. With heartfelt gratitude.